everyone. Welcome to Green Hope Foundation's webinar, Rebuilding Better with Women at the Forefront. My name is Kehkasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I am delighted to be your moderator today. My colleague, Pragna, head of events of Green Hope Foundation, will be live tweeting this webinar. In 5 days, we will commemorate International Women's Day as our world is gradually coming out of the throes of a pandemic that has caused unimaginable suffering, where true to form, we as women and girls have once again have had to bear the brunt of the agony. And even with the limited amount of data that is available, it is evidently apparent that more girls have had to drop out of school. There has been a deep spike in domestic violence against women and girls in marginalized communities. Cases of child marriage, trafficking have soared, and more women have lost their jobs in this COVID-19 crisis. Working from home for women has meant juggling careers, family, household chores all at the same time. And the healing touch in this crisis has come from caregivers across the world, most of whom are women. And now, as we struggle to build resilience from this pandemic, it is apt that the priority theme of the 65th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, women's full and effective participation and decision making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, should take center stage. But despite the fact that we are in the 21st century, in the age of innovation and technology, our position in society remains much as it was in the Dark Ages. And the status quo won't change unless we take the reins of destiny in our hands. It won't change unless we change mindsets within our homes. It won't change unless families bring up their child and children with love and respect, regardless of their gender. Even as we speak today, girls in the world's two most populous countries don't have the same rights, legal or otherwise, as boys. And even in the most developed nations, it's still considered news when a woman attains a leadership position. And the neoliberal agenda that has stereotyped what feminism should look like also needs to change. And to answer the how to all these questions, we have with us today an eminent intergenerational panel of women from across the world, from the Americas in the West to the island of Kiribati in the East, as we seek to attain a global perspective on how we can rebuild better with women at the forefront. So, I am honored to invite our first speaker today, Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa, 73rd President of the United Nations General Assembly and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, Ecuador. Ms. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kekeshan, for organizing this very timely dialogue and for having me here today with such extraordinary group of women. I really love this, all women panels. And basically, as you very, very well said, we are here to exchange some views on how to build back better our world with women and girls at the forefront in how to tackle the issue of women in power and women in leadership. And I think that you have said it so clearly. We are facing truly a time of crisis, multiple crises. Let's recall that the COVID pandemic last year started as a health crisis and turned very quickly into a systemic crisis, and that was, basically what we saw is the deepening of pre-existing structural inequalities, exposing vulnerabilities in our social, political, and economic systems, which are in turn amplifying the impacts of the pandemic and of sometimes the hardship that some countries are going through just to contain the pandemic, not to mention to recover from the pandemic and to reboost economies and sustainable development. Let's recall that until today, I haven't looked at the numbers today, but more than 2.5 million people have died because of COVID, and 114 million people worldwide have been infected by the virus. And at the same time, the pandemic has triggered the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, with a global economic contraction of minus 3.5% worldwide. And what we see, and it has been so clear in the arithmetics of inequality, that this pandemic and the connected multifaceted crisis, both social and economically, has affected disproportionately women and girls, and the numbers are there. Many of the hard-fought gains of women's rights are under threat, as the pandemic has magnified this, what I mentioned before, these structural inequalities and violence that affect women and girls. Across the globe, we know women earn less, have less access to education. They are overrepresented and underpaid or underrepresented in positions of power, and are overrepresented in underpaid or unpaid jobs. Therefore, their capacity to absorb economic shocks is less than that of men. And this is also has been a lesson from these pandemics. And we all can see the data, but let me just share with you on jobs and the employment sector. Women in the labor force the numbers were steadily declining already, but in 2020, 46.9, almost 47% of women worldwide participated in the labor force, which was already a strong decrease from the 51% in the 1990s. And now we know that millions of women are not going to go back to work after the lockdowns. The COVID exacerbated this situation. The pandemic caused unprecedented global employment losses in general, and women have been affected by employment loss to a greater extent. And this, of course, in our part of the world, in the global south, is even worse, because the vast majority of women's employment, 90%, is in the informal economy, with limited access to social protection. So basically, and we see that more than 70% of the health workers, the frontline health workers, are women, and yet women are not equally represented in positions of decision making. Women are underrepresented in high skilled, such as areas of STEM, of science, technology, and engineering, where they make up only for 29.3% of those working in scientific research and development, including the world of the vaccine development. And at the same time, they are overrepresented represented in reproductive labor, that is domestic care and healthcare, much of which remains underpaid or unpaid. So the situation, it's really not, shining, unfortunately. We know that violence, different forms of violence, but domestic violence has also increased because of the lockdowns, because of the new modalities of work and school. And I think that, even beyond the economic hardship, the pandemic has also increased women and girls' vulnerability to sexual, gender-based, and domestic violence. This is clear globally. Even before the pandemic began, 1 in 3 women suffered physical or sexual violence, in most cases at the hands of their partners. But since the pandemic broke out, new data indicates that in many countries, including my own, domestic violence has increased by almost 30%. COVID-19 has reversed progress in the fight against child marriage and the practice of female genital mutilation. So basically, this is the landscape, which is not, as mentioned, a bright landscape. That includes, of course, a recent study of Universal Health Coverage 2030 movement, where I have the privilege to serve as political advisor. Basically, they found that, just in looking at the COVID response advisory bodies nationally, they are composed 85% by men still. And that adds a little bit to these arithmetics of inequality. And why is that we have to stand up to raise our voices? It is not only because of optics. It is not only because it looks good. It is because we cannot exclude half of the world's population if we hope to build a new, sustainable post-pandemic future. It is essential to recognize the gender dimension of the pandemic and establish national, regional, and global gender balance recovery plans, and seriously address the implementation deficit in women's rights and international and domestic law and policy. This is critical. And this year is a very special year for women, for women's rights, because we are very close to the Generation Equality Forum kickoff in Mexico from the 29th to the 31st of March. The Generation Equality Forum, as you know, is convened by UN Women, co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France. And I think it is a golden opportunity to refuel international commitments to accelerate progress towards gender equality. So what is unique about the Generation Equality Forum is that it brings together government, civil society, organizations, and the philanthropic and the private sector as well. The forum will give advocates, activists from all over the globe to foster a set of strategic and transformative change to renew movements, policy, and action for gender equality. So I really would like to make an invitation as a citizen, as a woman from the Global South, an invitation especially for young women to be engaged. There is an interactive platform that is online, but also the forum itself is going to be virtual and open, to participation of women and men, young activists, men and women that are committed to the gender equality and the women's rights agenda. The Generation Equality Forum is organized in 6 coalitions looking at transformative actions and a compact on women, peace, and security. It looks like I'm doing a little bit of public relations for the forum, but I think it is, a golden opportunity to share this, especially with the audience from young women from around the world, because I know that the uniqueness of the Green Hope Foundation is that you work on the ground with the grassroots, and you work on a policy and making sure that highest levels of decision making take into account the voices of young women in particular. So I think that we all have the responsibility after 25 years since Beijing, and the best way to honor the principles and aspirations of the Declaration and Platform for Action of Beijing would be to use this moment in time to change course and to implement bold actions that close the gap for women and girls. As mentioned, the Generation Equality Forum, the process to Paris in June, Mexico, are going to be golden opportunity, to be a global platform to shape, to co-create and shape the agenda for women's rights and girls' rights for the future, and to really make sure that any recovery effort, any building back better strategy at the national, at the local and international level, really includes the voice and agency of women, but of women in positions of decision making, in positions of power. I'm a strong defender of the space we should and must have in positions of power. So thank you again, Kekashian, for this very timely conversation. March is the month for us, and it is a very good way to start this Women's Month with you, with the Green Hope Foundation, and with such amazing women in the panel today. Thank you, and back to you. I think I went over my time, so I'll speak very little afterwards. So, but thank you again, and back to you, Kekashian.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marie, and it's always a pleasure to hear your insights, and no worries. And yes, I think it's so important. We all understand how important it is that women are in positions of decision making, and not that because someone else is giving us a seat at the table, but because that seat and those seats are rightfully ours. And hopefully, like very soon, it would no longer be a surprise. So I said earlier that when women come into positions of power, it just becomes normal, and we will be able to achieve gender equality. And it really is high time, because so many years after Beijing, we still have so much to do in ensuring gender equality everywhere, especially in the global south. But yes, thank you so much for sharing your insights and bringing up those very important points. Thank you once again. I would now like to invite our next panelist, Claudia Garcia Guiza, who is the Political Affairs Officer in Weapons of Mass Destruction Branch of the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to extend my thanks for an invitation to take part in this webinar. I have to say that I am delighted to be here with such an amazing group of women. Women have played an important role in the history of nuclear disarmament movement, including the women's movements that were central to banning atmospheric nuclear tests during the Cold War. More recently, the woman who led the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons mobilized civil society throughout the development of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and were recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. Another example are the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and also many Hibakusha women who endured social stigma yet bravely came forward with their testimonies, and the Nobel Peace Prize, of course, winner, Alba Midral. While the engagement of women in disarmament and arms control processes has improved in the last decade, women continue to be significantly underrepresented in United Nations multilateral disarmament meetings and decision-making. In most international disarmament conferences, only about 1/3 of delegates are women. Even fewer are heads of delegations. The first committee of the General Assembly has had only a single female chair in 75 sessions. In 2020, women delivered only 1/4 of the statements. Gender equality is not only a moral imperative and fundamental human right, but also a powerful tool for progress in peace and disarmament. The UN Secretary General's disarmament agenda includes actions to ensure the full and equal participation of women in all decision-making processes related to disarmament and international security. The Secretary General has also made a personal commitment to work to achieve gender parity on all panels, boards, expert groups, and other bodies established under his auspices in the field of disarmament. In December 2020, the General Assembly adopted its 7th resolution on women, disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control. So we know the political commitment to women's full and effective participation is there, but numbers continue to show that we lack implementation, unfortunately. Breaking the glass ceiling and achieving gender parity in leadership and at all levels requires a combination of efforts that need to happen simultaneously. It takes both special measures and transformative cultural change. The High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Mrs. Sumi Nakamitsu, has suggested to member states to make a pledge to establish targets in their delegations. In the UN itself, the Secretary General has set a target to achieve gender parity at all levels in the UN by 2028. Gender parity was achieved in the most senior levels already in 2018, 2 years before the target. The Secretary General has highlighted gender equality as one of his priorities for 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic response has highlighted the power of women's leadership. As underscored by the Secretary General, there is a long and growing list of the transformative impacts of women's equal participation. For example, larger investment in social protection, more transparent governance, and more durable peace processes. Women's equal leadership and representation is a game changer we need. Through women's meaningful participation in decision-making, our efforts for peace and security become more effective. We need new and diverse perspectives to deal with the challenges of our time. We must collectively do more to create inclusive systems. It is not only about giving women a seat at the table. We must ensure that women can fully and effectively participate by mitigating obstacles for equal opportunities, making fundamental changes to organizational culture, and creating inclusive processes. It is not about changing women, but changing the systems that prevent them from achieving their potential. We need to better understand the forces that drive the systematic exclusion of women and other voices. Youth is one critical group that we must better at engaging, and especially young women. The UN is educating and empowering young people in disarmament through the outreach initiative, Youth for Disarmament, through which we work with 10 youth champions to engage their communities on disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control. The COVID-19 crisis is deepening existing inequalities and risks reversing the progress that has been made on gender equality and women's rights. Women's economic and physical security have been reduced, with millions of women having lost their jobs and rates of gender-based violence dramatically increasing. Progress we lose now can take generations to recover from. The COVID-19 crisis offers an opportunity to strengthen and adapt efforts to create enabling environments as we are working more remotely. It is also an opportunity for decision makers worldwide to reflect on what security means and invest in more inclusive policies with people at the center and gender equality at the heart. The continued marginalization of women in disarmament and the security field is a loss for all. There is an urgent need to recognize the indispensable contribution of women to disarmament. I hope that today's webinar contributes in this regard and inspires you to join the collective efforts for gender equality. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for highlighting. What I really liked about what you said is that, you know, gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but absolutely crucial for progress and peace and disarmament. And it's really horrifying to note how poorly women have been represented in peace and disarmament, even at the highest levels of policy making, even though now, you know, the process is getting slightly better and slightly more inclusive, but there is still a long way to go to get more women involved and ensure that women, again, have that seat at the table, a rightful seat in peace and nuclear disarmament. So thank you once again, Claudia. I now invite our next speaker, Dr. Elizabeth McGregor, founder, World Women's Veterinary Association, Harvard Fellow, leadership, and author of Women on the Ballot. Betsy, the floor is yours. Betsy, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Dr. Betsy McGregor, and I use the personal pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm speaking to you this morning from the Kawartha Lakes in Canada on the traditional lands of the Mississauga Nations. On your screen, beside the beautiful artwork of Gail Sinclair, is the report of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women. Rebuilding Forward must have at its center an understanding and a partnership of the teachings of our Aboriginal and First Nations peoples. Now, the Sankofa bird reminds us to fetch first what is at risk of being left behind before striding forward. So let's stand strongly on the shoulders of Beijing Forward, and I'm wearing a scarf that I purchased in Beijing at the NGO Parallel Forum. And in the spirit of honoring our history, I'm going to speak in my slides to my own history, emphasizing three themes: agriculture as founder of the World Women's Veterinary Association, politics as a three-time federal candidate in Canada, and the importance of scholarship as a former fellow at Harvard Medical School studying pandemics. Our first question was to take a look at short-term challenges and suggest solutions to scale up for long-term benefit. Now, on the left of your screen, may I introduce you to a portrait entitled Canada's Fathers of Confederation. Notice anyone missing? Well, it took 126 years to achieve Canada's first female prime minister, the Right Honorable Kim Campbell, and another 20 years until 6 women premiers out of 13 premiers, 6 served simultaneously, and some 88% of Canadians were governed by women in leadership. But a mere 6 years later, there were none. Lessons learned is that ground gained can be lost, and we need to consider sustainable solutions that can be taken to scale. So let me suggest 7. First, the judiciary. In Canada, women took to the courts to contest that women should be recognized as persons under the Constitution. Shockingly, this was not the first interpretation. And these famous 5 women from Alberta won their case in the Supreme Court and at the Privy Council in Britain. And in 1929, women were recognized as persons under the Constitution. To the right, women also took to the streets and marched until 1960, when the suffragist movement resulted in the universal franchise of the women's vote in Canada at the federal level. Now, thirdly, the strategy of empowering and strengthening civil society, representing the striving for equity and parity. Pictured on the screen is the Daughters of the Vote, which happens twice a year in Canada, under the helm of the NGO Equal Voice, bringing 338 young future women leaders to Parliament to sit in the seats of their members of Parliament. How inspiring. But let's not forget all the international NGOs on the ground like yours, our host Green Hope Foundation, and the importance of being underpinned by NGOs. Now, a fourth strategy is monitoring instruments. And on your screen on the left is a digital display of all the municipal councils, rural and metropolitan across our nation, representing the number of women who sit on those councils. In a similar fashion, the Interparliamentary Union displays women's presence in politics globally and ranks our countries. I'm going to suggest a fifth strategy, which is extremely important, which is the engagement and the analysis and the amplification of women in the media in achieving our goals. And sixthly, after my own bids for Parliament, I set about interviewing 95 trailblazing women in Canada and recording the stories of women from age 23 to 93, all party levels, including First Nation. There's 1 Prime Minister, 2 Deputy Prime Ministers, 3 Premiers, 19 women who ran to lead their political parties, and 49 intersectional, unique candidates in our country. Pathways to political power and the telling of women's stories is important in cutting path. I'll finish with the seventh strategy, which is very key to us. I believe academic scholarship and research, and draw to our attention the study of Dr. Supriya Garikipati at Liverpool University, who in the first quartile of COVID examined the COVID outcomes in terms of COVID deaths and COVID cases in nations led by men and women, with the result that it demonstrated significant and systematic improvements in COVID outcomes in nations led by women. These 7 strategies taken together are powerful allies in our step forward. Our second question that was posed is, what should be addressed first in developing nations? Well, as a founder of the World Women's Vet Congress in Rio de Janeiro on the upper left of your screen, and in Beijing with our delegation, and working internationally with women who are the backbone of subsistence farming, it would be my plea that we place, of course, women's and girls' education in top priority, but 5A, the ownership and securing of women's rights over agricultural lands, I would emphasize as a very important aspect of our prioritization. We were asked which targets need immediate reevaluation, and I say all of them. All indicators must engage in intersectional analysis, and our data must reflect gender as it intersects with ethnicity and age, disability, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, class, race. And in the tumble of infographics on the right of your screen, you will see what happens when this more refined and nuanced data collection reveals below the water level the true iceberg of the pandemic and how it hits women and girls disproportionately harshly. And this revelation, you cannot plan for people you cannot see. So the revelation of where and how the pandemic is hitting resulted in Canada in a unique combination of the Gate Foundation at Rotman University of Toronto with YWCA Canada in our first the Feminist Economic Recovery Plan for Canada. Question 4. What new variables need to be addressed in the context of COVID? Well, I have A, B, and C. A, there are 2 phases of COVID, and certainly medically, the genetic code and managing the biological medical prevention of vaccines and testing has huge. But it is our mandate, our calling, to place a focus on the postal code, or the undermining the health outcomes are the social determinants of housing and education, income insecurity, and food insecurity. And B, One Health. that COVID is a zoonotic. It is an infectious disease spread from animals to humans and exacerbated by climate change. So our consideration of strategies moving forward must embrace the One Health philosophy of animal, human, and the environmental health being interlocked and they must be linked together in our strategies. They're inextricably interwoven. And I'm going to finish where I began, which is back to the importance of other worldviews. And when we imagine building back better, building back differently, that we must reach well beyond the GDP, gross domestic product, and economic indicators into societal well-being. And in this regard, I would bring to our attention the model of New Zealand and its dashboard with over 100 indicators monitoring social, economic, environmental well-being, and incorporating the Aboriginal Maori worldview. So I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic that despite the serious setbacks of COVID in terms of girls and women, parity and equity, that the disruption that COVID has created in our globe is also pushing open the door, maybe even taking the door right off its hinges in terms of what is normal and what should a new normal look like. And I am confident and optimistic that with a panel of this talent, I'm all hands on deck with the talent to proceed to recreate a new normal in the decade and the opportunities that we have at the Gender Equality Forum and in the GSE 65. And let's revitalize our history and redefine our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I think that, again, you make some really important points, foremost being that ground gained can be lost, as you mentioned through your examples, and we really need long-term sustainable solutions for gender equality. We can't just say, oh, for this instance, we have achieved gender equality, that's it. No, we need to maintain that equality and ensure that it becomes normal. And I'd like to say that former Canadian Prime Minister Kim Campbell actually spoke at our first webinar of 2021. So I'm really glad you brought her up, and for someone who has been a trailblazer for our country. So thank you once again for highlighting how important building better into the new normal is. Thank you, Betsy. And with that, I'd like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Mila Popovic, member, Executive Committee of the World Academy of Art and Science, and founder of Evolving Leadership. Dr. Popovic, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. This is absolutely wonderful to be here because I already see how the panel is flowing in a particular way, kind of designing new architecture, new social architecture, and in so many ways demonstrating the convergence of knowledge in a way that generates new process of social learning that we see is organically coming together. Why do I say that? Is because the topic I wanted to address really builds so well on what, we started with Maria Fernanda and the way she set the stage with kind of macro, entire field opening up an entire macro view, and then we went kind of into the ways to wedge into the system from particular angles, whether that would be from disarmament and peace building to indigenous wisdom, or should I say the wisdom society's knowledge that we need to incorporate, that is intergenerational, that is transgenerational, and that is a sort of ancient futures that we know of and we need to be mindful of, and all the other wonderful facets that everybody else mentioned. I will, in that sense, reflect briefly on what was said before me, only to address a particular topic I wanted to add to the table and to the forum. As has already been set and said, if we continue practicing sustainability as we are doing it now, we're basically will be merely practicing damage control. if we're not practicing it as art of regenerative living, harmonizing social systems with natural systems, healing the biosocial conflict that is the very basis on which all of our structures have been built, then we are going to have really crooked structures that cannot hold, that will be very vulnerable and very fragile, and will definitely, we continue to develop as crooked beings. And as humanity and as species, will be definitely limping, granted this imbalance and dysfunctional situation that we have between genders and generations and regions and disciplines of knowledge. So that is one aspect I wanted to point out. And in terms of, like Maria Fernanda mentioned, painting that landscape, what we are discussing here is the macro picture of entire cultural shift as prerequisite for systems transformation. And in that sense, what's necessary is to shift mindsets and mentality, which is the shift in values, the shift in media, of which Elizabeth spoke, as that promoter, right, or ventriloquist of those values. We need to shift our money and basically putting our money where our values are, that are values of life affirming, regenerative, inclusive, well-being, money for well-being, wisdom, and transformation, as well as shifting the markets. We're not going to speak of military, hoping that that's the groundbreaking part. Countering that power, I'm hoping that there will be building of social forces and resources in converging like this that can actually counter that with people power. So this is again to address a little bit the notion of sustainability, to address or refer to cultural shift that is necessary, and also point out to those key factors that need to be shifting for social transformation, and the transformation that is necessary at all levels of human action and activity. To this topic, I would like to add the issue of global women's migration. I think that's a truly devastating picture to paint. And at the same time, it could be an outstanding opportunity to truly generate the cultural shift and to, in fact, generate new source of social agency, to build new social artists, to build in the sense of Bildung, emancipate, develop, nurture, and empower new social artists, and to really have these new agents in the world, from the most destitute to the most opportune positions and capacities. So just to briefly touch on some statistics, because the speakers before me have given plenty of information to paint that larger picture. But I'm just going to send us back a little bit to 2016. Why I'm doing that, as you can imagine, I'm actually reflecting back on the adoption of SDGs and tracking them to 2020 at least, right? Which is very significant. So on the International Women's Day in 2016, the International Organization for Migration spoke of this unwavering commitment to gender equality and empowerment for hundreds of millions of women and girls across the globe who have been migrating, who have been refugees, in exile, running from disaster, or seeking opportunity. And the United Nations official theme for that year was Planet 50/50 by 2030. Step it up to gender equality. And I'm going to put that information in 2016 right next to a report from World Economic Forum that spoke of the fact that in pre-COVID-19 crisis, they predicted that at the current rate of progress, it will take us 257 years to close the economic gender gap in terms of education and employment parity. These are incredible cracks in the system that kind of shocking just in numbers to paint that picture. The true picture is actually painted in personal stories that one gets to hear if you get to hear them. And that is why disseminating these personal stories is a very important form of activism, testifying to one's own pathways, as well as witnessing empathetically others. And in that sense, women's migrations are offering us, like I said, a very terrifying picture. And at the same time, maybe if we looked at it in a different way that Elizabeth pointed towards, we might start to recognize certain opportunities. I could continue talking about the plight of women and girls, which I think Maria Fernanda also addressed, and this terrible gap between also that they are at the forefront of absorbing those shocks and having to find regenerative methods and nurturing ways to heal and cure and care for and continue producing and feeding and nurturing, while at the same time so very few are in the leadership positions. So we continue on any scale of, like I said, or any scale and level of human activity and association. Those gaps are maddening, frankly, enraging, at least should be. So my notion, my view, I would say, from a migrant woman testifying to her own story, is that there is a terror of losing so much life in the pandemic situation. At the same time, so much is shifting, but the very skills and capacities of women, while we are again absorbing those shocks in the most drastic way, at the same time, the skills of the future are going to be those that have been absolutely ignored and marginalized, underpaid, or not paid, or not remunerated pre-COVID. If we only take, just as an example, the situation with doctors and nurses, the increasing development of artificial intelligence is going to improve the capacity to diagnose people in more and more customized way, right? Also to kind of generate or convene and collect that collective intelligence in finer and finer forms of artificial intelligence, where the surgery will be done remotely with precise ways. But the nurturing and nursing can't be done, nor any possible well-being or holistic well-being is possible individually and collectively without the human connection, without new culture of intimacy, without nurturing and things like that. This is just to take one profession. And it seems to me that the future is promising that way, of course, for those that can sail the transition. So I really wanted to at least point towards another issue where, with the question of women's migration, I think this is where the problem of safety, human security, of which Claudia spoke of the intersectionality of which Elizabeth spoke of the terrible disparities in decision-making at the exact same time when we need that political leadership to make everybody's lives safer, let alone migrants' lives safer, of which Maria Fernanda spoke. I'm just kind of taking all of our conversations forward with delight. This is the time of great opportunities and the greatest devastations if we can handle the transition. So I would like to say that at least point in terms of social agency, the possibility for an empathetic revolution that we need, that women migrants are capable of testifying to, engendering, and hopefully enacting with proper support, is tremendous, tremendous resource, because they have traversed many cultures, they have traversed many systems, they have traversed many modes of operation and survival, making way out of no way most of the time. And also they could be an incredible model of new subjectivity, of a kind of collectivity from within, of which I have been focusing on in many years of my recent professional and personal life as kind of a therapeutic academic practice. So this is just to bring something to the table, point to the possibilities of learning and generating new process of social learning for building new social architecture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Popovich. And yes, we do need regenerative and healing methods, particularly because normal brought us to this pandemic, and the current ways and methods of addressing sustainability. If we continue to do that, then, as you said, we're only doing damage control, and we're just sustaining those crooked, fragile structures, as you said. So, yes, that is so true. And of course, I think the pandemic has highlighted how important the skills that were not really given any importance prior to the pandemic and were, less paid or unpaid work, how important they are for the future, because people are now recognizing that without those jobs and without those skills, we will not be able to progress as the human race. So thank you so much for bringing that up and for sharing your perspectives. Thank you once again. And with that, I invite our next panelist, Cynthia Lazaroff, who is the founder of Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy and nuclearwakeupcall.earth. Cynthia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Kekasha, for inviting me to be part of this incredibly important conversation with all of you extraordinary women. Every one of you has taught me so much already, and I'm just deeply honored to be here today. Thank you. Kekasha, you asked me to share a bit about my journey with this work, and I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. And let's see. So my journey started when I was very young, and it's a deeply personal journey. I grew up during the Cold War, where I heard over and over again that the Soviet Union would always be our enemy and that we could all die in a nuclear war. The fear of nuclear war was omnipresent and palpable. And at 9 years old, when I read a story about American boys going to Russia, I told my parents I wanted to go to Russia someday. I wanted to meet the Russian people because the feeling of this enemy story, something didn't sit right with me. My dream came true when I was a student, an exchange student in college in Leningrad. And what I found was that I made very dear Russian friends, some of whom became like family. I came to know and love like family, like these two dear ones. And there was just a huge disconnect between the experience I had with the Russian people and my friends and the thousands of nuclear weapons that our countries had pointed at each other. This became even more true for me when I began to teach children at a school in Moscow. And what we found was that we all wanted the same thing. The kids wanted to meet American kids. We wanted contacts and peace, and none of us wanted to die in a nuclear war. I came home wanting to do something, but at that time I could see no women at all, no women like we're graced to see today, all of you on the panel and in the disarmament area, Claudia and Maria Fernanda, on the world leadership level. There was nothing like that at the time. But I could look for inspiration to women leading in the disarmament movement, like Randall Forsberg, the founder of the revolutionary changing nuclear freeze movement that made a huge difference. And Randall didn't wait to be invited to the table. She built her own table where there was a place for everyone. And that's what we did in the citizen diplomacy movement with the former Soviet Union here in the United States. The risk of nuclear war was too great. There was no time to wait for our governments. And so we also built a table where everyone was welcome. We were attempting to build peace between peoples to create the conditions for peace between our governments. And women came forth to lead in this movement alongside men. My work took the form of dialogues between Soviet and American women on reducing the threat of nuclear war and fulfilling the promise I made to my students to create exchange programs to bring young people together for the first time. Our favorite program was taking kids from the two countries to the summit of the highest peak in Europe to demonstrate our ability to cooperate, survive, and thrive together. We wanted to share this vision, so we made a film about it that we broadcast around the world. And we were thrilled when, against all odds, everyone had said this would be impossible. Our two leaders came together and they began to talk about eliminating nuclear weapons from the face of the earth and began the largest nuclear reductions in our arsenals in history. After the Cold War ended, I thought I could stop worrying about nuclear war. And I went to work on coral reefs, climate change, and sustainability. And I thought I'd be doing this work for the rest of my life. All of this changed for me in 2017 when I went to work on a film interviewing dozens of top experts on nuclear dangers. Just weeks after interviewing former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and our US former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, I was one of over 1 million people here in Hawaii across the islands who got this message on my cell phone. Ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. And as I was racing to shelter in a cave and waiting for the missile to strike at any moment, and I called my daughter Mackenzie to say goodbye and I love you for what I thought might be the last time. This is what led me back, this experience of going through the false alarm to work on disarmament. I started Nuclear Wake Up Call.Earth. We work in many ways to try to reduce the nuclear risk. And we asked the question, what could be game-changing? What could really be game-changing in this work? And when asking that question, the answer came to me from women. These 4 women came to me all within the space of about a week. None of them knew each other. None of them had ever done anything with nuclear weapons. And they all asked if I would mentor them in this work, which brought to mind women that I had been meeting in Russia and from countries all over the world, India, here across the United States, who all had reached out to me as I was re-engaging in the work, touched by the story of going through the false alarm and saying goodbye to my daughter and that I love you, and reaching out and saying, I want to do something. Can we come together and do something? So this was the call of women that actually created and why Women Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy was born. We work to foster a new generation of women leaders in peace building and disarmament. And we work to catalyze a global movement of women and girls to eliminate nuclear weapons. We recognize that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by nuclear weapons due to ionizing radiation, and that since the dawn of the nuclear age, women have been largely shut out of nuclear security planning and policy making. Women are still grossly underrepresented in the nuclear policy space today, and excluding half of the human race for much of the nuclear age has brought us to the brink of possible extinction. Because the research shows that when women are involved in peace building processes and negotiations, peace agreements become more possible and more enduring. So today, at this time of the global pandemic, more than ever, it's an existential imperative that we write a new nuclear story and women come forward to lead, to claim our seats at the table, to transform our nuclear legacy and to eliminate nuclear weapons. We had our first inaugural session last September. I'm sure you can recognize Kekasha there, who blessed us with her wisdom. And we've since had 4 sessions, engaged over 300 women from 42 countries of all ages and backgrounds, really looking to engage newcomers in this work and bringing them together with experts and people engaged in this work across the spectrum of the nuclear space. And our mentors, we really are celebrating and honoring their work, and they help to build nuclear literacy, because this is an issue that if nuclear weapons can destroy all of us, we all have a stake in becoming experts together to eliminate nuclear weapons. So in addition to building nuclear legacy, they really, and especially ones like Kekasha, take us through the journey of the intersectionality of nuclear weapons with systemic racism, radioactive racism, the existential threats of the global pandemic and climate change, and the absolute critical need to bring in the people power that Dr. Popovich mentioned, to address the issue of the spending that is going on nuclear weapons, 73 billion in 2019 on nuclear weapons, 1.9 trillion on militarism, the intersectionality of the resources that are being spent on weapons of mass destruction and militarism that absolutely are existentially necessary, and it's clear now more than ever during the pandemic, to help us redefine security for our time and to bring that gender lens to that security, to that redefinition of the security, which all of you on the panel have so beautifully and eloquently walked us through this morning. And the intersectionality between the absolute imperative of disarmament and our capacity to have the resources necessary to implement the SDGs. So that's I started this talk by saying that, there was really, when I looked around, there were no women that I could look to who were in leadership positions. And here we are with all of you this morning, and in particular, Maria Fernanda and Claudia in the field of foreign policy and disarmament. And we can look to the women, as Claudia mentioned, who really led the quest for the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that really are a guiding light for us at this time. We were blessed to have Ambassador Gomez-White, who presided over the negotiations for the treaty at the UN, as our honored guest at our inaugural session. And she said, history is made by every single step that we take every day. And she called on all of us as women from all over the world, of all ages, from all backgrounds, to come together, to join her in making history, and to claim our seat at the table, to realize the vision of the TPNW, and to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the earth forever. May that be so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And first of all, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and the amazing work that you've done throughout your life to ensure that nuclear disarmament is at the forefront and women are at the forefront of nuclear disarmament. And it's really frightening to note how the propaganda surrounding nuclear weapons makes us think of each other as the enemy, and it provides us with this false sense of security when in reality it's the greatest threat to all of humankind. And I'm so glad you talked about how women have been largely shut out of the nuclear disarmament process, and how their exclusion has literally brought us to the stage of near extinction, and how the TPNW has proved why women are so instrumental in ensuring peace and disarmament all over the world, and really ensuring sustainability in general across the world. So thank you once again, Cynthia. I would now like to invite our next panelist, Dr. Fran Epprich, award-winning scriptwriter, CAN, and project manager of Talking Hands. Dr. Epprich, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kakash. And once again, a pleasure to be part of your journey from a kid to a beautiful, intelligent young woman. It's really a delight to see you as always and to be part of this panel and being inspired by all of you. Really, I can say that it's quite amazing, actually, what I just heard, which was the perfect intro from Cynthia. So thank you, Cynthia, for women supporting women and claiming our place at the table. That was also like one book title, Women Supporting Women, that I wrote with a colleague of mine, Dr. Kathy O'Sullivan. And it's exactly about that. I think the first question of yours was, how can we make gender equality happen? And I think, as we could all see from the statistics that were mentioned, we need to support each other. Without each other, we cannot, make this happen. And I think that's exactly it, what I wanted to bring to the table. I have seen so many different levels, from governments to project management to educational systems, from my own experience, how women can support each other and can really be mentors for each other. And it doesn't matter how old you are, in many ways, Kakash, and you also meant it to me. So it's not only that we have to always look up or look to the person who we're working with, it's also sometimes inspiring people that we meet. And I think especially also every child also that I meet and receive an honest answer from is really an inspiration, and gives me that honesty that I need also for my work, especially in the educational field, but also in the entrepreneurial field. So I really think yeah, together we can make it happen, but it's crucial that also in powerful positions we support young women. And very often when I read job opportunities, it says, okay, we encourage women to apply, and by equal qualification, and sometimes also it says, yeah, years in the job, yeah. But is that even possible? Like we bring many different layers, as women to the table, and I think that's a beautiful thing. We are mothers, we're sisters, we're daughters. We have so many aspects that also research shows. Big corporations always benefit from women on the table, and actually companies with women, 50% women on the table, are actually more successful than no women at all. So we have this aspect, I'm generalizing now, but like of empathy, of emotional intelligence. Obviously I'm generalizing here, but there are so many wonderful things that we as women have to give, not only on the emotional side, but also economically seen. And that, I think, is a really crucial part. Then also we mentioned about the pandemic, and yeah, women supporting women. For me, I can only talk about my own family. The real heroes of the pandemic, at least in my family, are the grandmothers at the moment, who step in when, for example, the women have to go to work, who look after the kids, who jump in happily. That's another thing, happily to take on that extra responsibility. And we should give them all, I think, an award. Something else that I thought was important is that there was a quote saying that men of quality respect women's equality. And I think, again, in a partnership or in general, these are the men that we really should have by our sides as business partners, as partners in general. These are the people that we want to have around, who really value us for what we law to make sure that, for example, big corporations, and I completely agree with that, have 50% women, on the leadership table. I think that's really, really crucial. Otherwise, again, I don't think we will make it. It has to be also part of the lawmaking. I come from the entertainment side of things as well. For example, in France, we have 50% of all radio play has to be French music, and 50% can be from all over the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Why? Because it really supports the music economy, and it really, really makes sure that we have, great talent being shown and great talent being part of our community. The second question you asked were the region-specific developing nations. And here I thought it was also important to mention that obviously education is a big word, right? But especially now, as we can see, even with this situation, we can connect with so many people online. I also hope that, for example, big universities like Harvard, Yale, that thankfully I could, be in contact with as well, that they could also have online courses that people all over the world could watch and be inspired by, so that we can bring education really to the masses. And that's really something that I think would be wonderful, because what knowledge gives to all people, no matter what gender, is obviously a skill. And with that skill comes very often then a job, then money. And money, in my opinion, also then is crucial to find your own freedom. And I think that's also really important when talking about gender equality, to be economically independent, to create something. We've seen it with, microcredits for women that was really, really successful. So I think this is something that also we should practice more. The third question was the SDG 5 Sustainable Development Goal. Absolutely, again, women should own property. They should especially be also trained in technology. I know that in some countries that's really difficult, of course, but here also my dream is, and I'm open to any suggestions of the panelists to create technology-based centers in all over the world, really, for women, also that they can be part of the stock market, that they can be part of great aspects of money making that I sometimes feel a lot of ladies and young girls are not so interested in, but I'm sure we could find a twist to turn that around and create stories around the stock market that would interest them. For example, to look at the stock market of Louis Vuitton and so forth, like really tap into something that they really love and use that then as a tool to get to know the stock market and generate money. Also sometimes extra money, okay, especially when you're studying. I think that would be really wonderful. Artificial intelligence was another aspect that I think could be crucial to gender equality. Why? Because I feel that in many developing countries, going to school is a real big luxury, and I hope that artificial intelligence could provide again, girls, boys too, but girls also the opportunities to maybe not immediately, because it takes time to read and write and to learn all of that, but also to code, for computers with iPhones and so forth. That could be also done. I know there are technological challenges, but I really think that with artificial intelligence, we don't need to start from zero. We can already jump into something that could generate money quickly, which I think is the key to a lot of ladies' initiatives and goals, really, to support their family. That's also crucial. The fourth question was about the pandemic. And the violence that, domestic violence, which is obviously terrible. As an entrepreneur and also an educator, I really think, again, it's important to give ladies a way out. And by a way out, I don't mean just to give them shelter, but to give them the tool to really pay for their own shelter, to create their own home, and to make sure that the children are safe. I think that's something that is really deeply rooted in my heart, to make sure more young women can see that their skills can turn into jobs, money, and then hopefully also a freedom that they can enjoy with a partner of their liking. Thank you very much, Kikashan.
Thank you so much, Fran. And yes, supporting women, that is so crucial, and one needs to respect women, and boys need to be taught to respect women, their sisters, mother, grandmother, female friends, and really any woman, is irrespective of their age. And you talked about education, and we absolutely agree that, irrespective of gender, it gives the life skills to survive, to be economically independent. And to just add to your point, education, STEM education, education on stock markets, AI, right from the beginning, that allows girls to learn about that from a young age, develop that interest, and then have the freedom to choose what their field of study should be and what their expertise should be. So yes, education and education for sustainable development is absolutely crucial in this fight for gender equality. So thank you, Fran, once again. And with that, I invite our next speaker, Atiyuta Mataiti, gender and women's rights activist from the island of Kiribati. Atiyuta, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Kekashan. So, very good morning to you all, those who are attending, and our panelists as well. Before I start, I will be sharing my screen for my PowerPoint presentation. So just bear with me a moment. Okay. All right. Okay, so before I start, I would like to introduce my country for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. Cuba is one of the many island countries in the Pacific, consisting of 36 atolls scattered across the Pacific in the North, East, South, and West Hemisphere. We are Micronesians by heart, which, as defined in ancient Greek, means small and light islands. Being small has its benefits, but in regards to climate change, we unfortunately have to face the brunt of it with a great chance of our islands submerging underwater. Okay. So the first question that I was asked was, how did I start my journey as a gender activist and what inspired me to do so? So coming from a family of hardworking women, my inspiration came from women who made significant contributions to my life. I grew up in a conservative country and we had very little contact with the outside world while growing up. So I was unfamiliar with gender activists, but I was aware that there were ambitious Kiribati women working hard to provide financially and test our cultural limits, but they were not celebrated or acknowledged by them. However, by the time I reached university, a lot had changed and I had the chance to meet and read about some very prominent women in the Pacific, such as Jacinda Ardern, Teresa Dewa, Dame Meg Taylor, and a few others who have made significant contributions to Kiribati and the Pacific. These women have inspired me to be ambitious and to promote and support gender equality within my country. The major challenge of being an activist, I'd say, is the continuing dominance of males within my country. The next slide will discuss the gender equality situation in my country to give you an insight of the challenges Kiribati women and myself included face on a daily basis. So gender equality in my country is actually greatly supported. However, this is only in theory. A study shows that more than 80% of Kiribati men and women agree to gender equality, and 92% of Kiribati women and 99% of Kiribati men agree that men and women should share domestic chores and equal autonomy with women. However, validation to this claim suggests otherwise. The same study shows that 90% of women and 92% of men agree that women should obey their husbands at all times. So male dominance and control over decision-making and their limiting of women's autonomy implies that women have a lower social value, making women economically dependent on men and undermining women's participation in the public sphere. However, thanks to a few organizations and foundations which have encouraged women's empowerment, a lot of women in the capital are now transitioning their domestic skills and chores into business to provide for their family and are fulfilling their autonomy. The UN Women in Kiribati reported that since 2007, more than 50% of women compromises the workforce and girls outnumber boys in secondary and tertiary education. The Kiribati government has already embraced the idea that women are exceptional leaders, and this can be seen in the nomination of a female Speaker of Parliament last year, as well as women now dominating the workforce. However, it is quite important to note that the study was taken in the capital islands, so progress in the outer islands is still required. So how has climate change affected women in my country? Well, the women in Kiribati are more likely to be affected by climate change due to their key role in their family. Gender roles, as discussed, plays a major role in our community. And one important daily cultural role for women is hunting for cockles and mussels and fish along our shores. This provides food on the table for their family, and they are also able to sell them and provide money as well. However, the increase in temperature has affected these shells and fishes' ecosystem, and studies show that there is an alarming decrease of these marine organisms in Kiribati. Additionally, coastal erosion has degraded the quality of our lands and agriculture, thus impacting trees and herbs used to provide food, artifacts, and medicines mainly done by women. However, on a brighter note, a lot of women have shown concern in this dramatic change and have become activists of climate change by voicing out their opinions and improving our gender equality as well. So yeah, so pretty much the next question was what can be done to ensure greater participation of women in policy making? So simply put, we have to legislate the mainstreaming of gender equality principles across the country. However, I came upon an interview made by Irene Miss Kiribes, who is also a gender activist, and she could have not said it better. In order for Kiribes to ensure greater participation in policymaking, everything starts from the home, because we as Kiribati people, we are really cultural oriented. So as a Kiribati female, all attitudes and skills are taught from home, and these attributes are actually more respected and accepted than our academic accomplishments and achievements. So yeah, so the next question was, does the pandemic provide an opportunity to achieve greater gender equality? So in regards to this pandemic, fortunately, Kiribati is COVID-free and there are no curfews, lockdowns, or limitations apart from the border closure. However, it is largely agreed that the pandemic has more negative than positive impacts on women. As you can see, this slide shows a few of the challenges we are currently facing in the Pacific. For instance, gender-based violence in neighboring countries such as Fiji and New Zealand have been reported to dramatically increase due to the lockdown. This dramatic increase, however, in turn calls for action, as it also improves our gender equality during this pandemic. So yeah, and I really apologize for this, but I'm just starting my journey as a women activist, so I don't really have much to say about what I have done as an activist, but I am hoping to be joining platforms in order to promote and empower women in my country. So that is all from me today, and thank you so much. All right, thank you, Kekasha.
Thank you so much, Atiuda. And there is never any need to apologize. The fact that you are here and talking about why it's so important that we need gender equality, and just you being yourself is you being a gender and women's rights activist. And I think we as women apologize too much as well, because that is what society has drilled into us. But yes, never apologize for just being yourself. But thank you so much for highlighting the work that is being done in your country. And I think you brought up a really important point that a lot of the times we have gender equality in theory, but when putting it into practice is what's important. And that is where we are lacking. So that really does need to be addressed. So thank you so much, Atiuda, for speaking about why it's so important that we do need women and girls at the forefront. So thank you once again. And thank you to all of our panelists for the absolutely amazing insights that have been shared today. I just feel so happy to be able to be here and listen to all of you. It's truly an honor. So I'm sure that we have many questions from our audience, and I do see raised hands. So I shall just begin by promoting all of you to panelists. So the first question I'll be taking is from Narayan Srivastava, and they will be joining us as panelists. Narayan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for the amazing discussion and the informative things that I've got to learn today. My question is to all the panelists. Gender-based data gaps are often cited as the missing aspects that prevent policymaking from addressing gender equality. What steps can be taken to rectify this, both by the governments and by the civil society?
Thank you, Narayan, for your question. Would any of our panelists like to answer that first? I know some of you talked about gender data gaps. I think, Betsy, you did so.
Sure. If I could hear you clearly, thank you for the question. And the encouraging thing is that these instruments, these public policy instruments, are available and they're systematic. UN Women might be a place to go to find some of these public policy tools, gender-based analysis or gender-responsive budgeting, or a feminist foreign policy. There are certain instruments, and in our own country, as one small example, they have become entrenched in legislation that no request for funding from government can go to Treasury Board without having to go through these policy lenses or filters, just like environmental protection filters was quite unique several decades ago and remains urgent today, but these instruments are available. So one suggestion here might be to check out UN Women, and I Know Politics is another organization that provides these instruments that are already checklists, and a checklist doesn't equal action, but it certainly improves the process.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Would anyone else like to answer that question? Yes, Ms. Maria.
Well, I think that what we heard from Elizabeth is already, a lot. And indeed, I think that Canada is a reference point for that. But I would like to recall the 7 points that you made yourself, that provide, Elizabeth, that provide, so many, a sort of a roadmap on what to do. And I would like to make perhaps 2 very quick comments. Number one is the implementation gap that we are facing, because if you look at, existing legislation, norms and policies, the work of UN Women, the work of several governments, and I think that the problem has been this implementation gap. Action, we need action. And as some of you have mentioned already, it is not about damage control. It is not about, putting a Band-Aid here and there. It is about transformational change. It is about changing the value system in our societies that naturalize stereotypes, exclusion, discrimination. Our judicial systems, we should fight impunity when there are cases of violence in any form against women. One of the issues that I think that we should look at carefully is the issue of political violence against women. In my conversation, especially with younger women, they want to go into politics, they want to serve, they want to be in office, and they are so right, because we need more of us, especially the younger generations. The problem is that they get so afraid that they're going to be attacked, that their private lives are going to be exposed. And they kept, asking me, how to handle that. And sometimes I see, young politicians from my own country, they are in panic. They just say, I want to do it, but I just need to preserve my own personal life, my family, etc. So I think we should be stronger and bolder in fighting, political violence against women. That's one of the critical issues, and address seriously the implementation gap. And I think that's why the Generation Equality Forum is not very much focused on the agenda itself. It's bringing to current times the Beijing Platform for Action, which was like a huge World Cup creation. It's bringing it down to earth and establishing transformative action, speeding up action and result-oriented commitments on the women's rights agenda and the gender equality agenda as well. And great question, Ariane. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. Dr. Popovich?
Yes, thank you so much for that great question, Narayan. I would like to add that there are two sides to this data tracking. And one of them is definitely the value of shocking people into awareness with tracking the gaps, tracking the terror of statistics, right? And presenting that in stark numbers. But the other side, the flip side, is equally tracking the positive practices, positive examples that can incentivize awareness, right? And if you're able to do that as a double bind of activating social power, then that's really multiplying, exponentially multiplying the power of those statistics, right? And, I'm thinking here, I'm speaking in general terms now, but I'm thinking here, like if you're bringing to the forefront the effects, positive effects of bringing in more women into the leadership in, say, corporate world, or investing in women, or developing their financial literacy and bringing them into fintech or something like that, or also showcasing initiatives such as there's a wonderful, I'll be just advertising for wonderful people, Plastic Bank, an initiative that two men started, socially conscious men started, investing in women with the double, triple bind on systemic change, where they would take women in these developing countries, which is really, all of our classifications are so outdated, sadly. But let's say in the developing countries that for sure have become the dumping ground for the industrial countries, right? And then they would engage women from poverty strata, walks of life, and educate them on fintech. They would educate them and give them, digital accounts. These are unbanked people, right? So you're leapfrogging. I think Fran spoke about that. You're leapfrogging, you jumping over these, stages of development and educating women in fintech, in digital capacities, putting all the information on blockchain, getting them to basically what they do. They gather plastic from their region, deposit them into plastic bank. For that, they get cryptocurrency. So in the family structures, no man, whether that's a father, a husband, a brother, or even a son that is in control of their finances, can touch them because they don't know it, right? So you are doing a systemic intervention, right? By educating women, cleaning the planet, socializing plastic, repurposing it, and upcycling it, as they call it. Then they develop an entire, say, contract with IKEA to create and design most hip new furniture from that plastic. They give women cryptocurrency. They create a community ecosystem for exchanging value amongst themselves and educate them in the digitalized world by supplying phones and educating them that. I'm just kind of drawing a sketch of what's possible. And that's an example. But tracking these capacities, both issues on the scary part of things or terrifying side of things, and also on the terrific side of things. It's a two coins of the same thing that we could actually, after putting those statistics in the forefront, we could actually devise better ways of connecting the entire neural network of those social initiatives all over the world into a true global movement. And I know Keshkashan operates that way as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Popovich. Would anyone else like to add something? Or if not,
Just a short nuance to that, but the term gender is so homogenous that in respecting this question, which is very exciting, it is important to challenge every government, including our own, to get way beyond a biological male-female and dig deep into seeing how things are racialized and religious affiliation, sexual orientation, all reveal a very different story. A different narrative is told. So the instruments are important, but the adaptation of the instruments to reflect intersectionality is a really powerful ally to revealing which path is the best forward and which policy will result in effective action addressing all.
Absolutely, that is so true and so crucial in today's day and age. Would anyone else like to comment? Or if not, Thank you very much, Narayan, for your very pertinent question. And I shall invite our next question from Hitasha. Hitasha, the floor is yours.
Good morning, panelists. I'm Hitasha, Outreach Officer for Green Hope Oman. I want to thank the panelists for this amazing discussion. My question is, how can the media play a bigger role in breaking stereotypes about women and their traditional roles in society?
Thank you very much, Hitasha. Who would like to begin to answer that?
It was in my slides. I can jump in and thank you for your questions. The media is a really important amplification. And in the example I used in my slides was a group of women at the Toronto Star who are tracking women's leadership. And they're telling the story of the digital accounting for the presence or absence. So I truly believe that you've struck an important chord in the movement, which is the engagement also on all the social media platforms, but in the traditional press also, to be able to display an intersectionality, to record it and report it. And in that kind of transparency results in an accountability, a revealing of how stark, both the positive stories, as Mila was so encouraging, the storytelling and narratives of best practices and of women's championship, as all the women on this screen are true champions. Their stories are empowering me out at my lake here to think, how can I be more broadly involved in Mila's and Cynthia's and each one of your advocacy? So the media is an important aspect, and your generation will be so fluent in social media power. It's a double sword. There are other edges that need to be addressed. And certainly in the book Women on the Ballot, Women in Politics spoke about how tricky that double edge is in terms of dealing with the viciousness that can occur online, which requires some regulation and some adaptation. But it is, in the end, a wonderful vehicle for transparency and accountability.
Thank you so much, Betsy. Would anyone else like to answer that question?
I would like to just jump in quickly and to turn the question back to you in some ways and call on Kehkashan's example, not only of building an organization, but providing a channel for bringing information, personalities, experiences, stories, activism, leadership like this. I mean, first of all, I do want to commend you even before the ending on an incredible panel and the spectrum of experiences and expertise, right? And perspectives that were brought on. But the thought that whether in politics, people will say, nominate yourself, elect yourself, run for offices, the same way, the only way to create a counterbalance and a counterpoint to mass media that is so powerfully and so twistedly invested in is to multiply exponentially the number of voices like this and create channels that Elizabeth spoke about, using the social media truly proactively, consciously, ethically, creating new ethically led media channels to bring your voices. And for that, it is so important to empower each other, to support each other, to reinforce the fact that leadership is about unleashing the capacities and potential of others. That's what makes you a leader, actually, no other way. So in that sense, I just wanted to turn the mirror towards you and say, what are the ways in which every single one of us, not to call on you and expect you to be solely responsible, but what are the ways we can kind of make all these personalized channels go along the same lines of values and create that critical mass for global movement, right? That's exciting. That's high responsibility. If we take into the account that, as Elizabeth also mentioned, technology, like any tool, is a double-edged sword. A knife can save a life and feed you, or it can destroy a life, right? Take away the life, depending on the consciousness that's using the tool. The same way any technology. But if we think about the fact that the technology of the future is going to be the one that creates the conditions for every individual to design their own destiny. Whoa. Then all the rights and responsibilities and the empowerment starts from within to say, let me use the tools, use them well, use them consciously in a truly ethically leadership way to magnify, intensify, and multiply the messages like this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Miss Maria.
Well, I just, it's, you know, unbelievable how we are connected. I wanted to basically, I want to echo what Mila just said and Elizabeth. And I think that it all starts by household stereotypes. You know, I have 3 brothers. I was the only daughter. I grew up, you know, learning to say no, for example, to household domestic work that wasn't shared equally with my brothers. And that was my mom. You know, we need that kind of strong role models. And, you know, school books, you know, until recently in my country, we had to change the school books for primary school because, you know, they reinforced so much, you know, gender stereotypes. You saw these pictures, you know, for primary school boys and girls, it's saying things like, well, dad is going to work, mom is staying at home, and the little drawing there, etc., etc. You know, already allocating these very fixed gendered roles in the household, etc. So there's a lot to do, the media, the school and education at home, you know, everywhere. I would say it's a multiple, an effort of multiple layers and different spaces, and also to speak up. You know, when we, since we are very little, I remember, you know, saying to my brothers, no, we do this 50-50 or not, we are 4, you know, and we divide the work in 4, you know, either connected to you know, cooking, or connected to cleaning, or to, you know, whatever activities we needed to do. It is very, very important. And that leads me perhaps to pick up on something that I think Cynthia or Mila spoke about, the care economy. And I think the care economy, we have to be very careful about, you know, how we shape, you know, the care economy for the future. For me, the future of the economy relies very much on care. The rest can be done by robots or by, you know, the only area of the economy that cannot replace humans is the care economy. And the demand for care is growing exponentially, you know, because of older people, you know, in terms of the demographics, et cetera, et cetera. But it is an area where, you know, in terms of safe jobs, well-paid and remunerated jobs, non-gendered jobs in the care economy, et cetera, can really unleash, you know, freedom for women at the global level. That was the general comment I wanted to make. And just to keep in mind, when we talk about the new technologies and the digital revolution, just to keep in mind that half of the world does not have access to internet, and to digital means. And when you look at women, the number goes upper. And when you look at the 1,800 billion children that you know, had to leave school because of lockdowns and the pandemic, you know, some numbers say that 30 or 40% of girls are not going to go back to school because they are needed at home with no access to the internet. So digital inclusion is one of the critical challenges that we face if we want to build inclusive societies, recover better from the COVID-19 pandemic. build better and more democratic societies. This is one of the key issues. And of course, I responded, you know, way beyond what Hitasha was asking. But okay, that's it. Back to you, Kikashan.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. And I'll yes, Claudia. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just to add, well, gender stereotyping in media and in the advertising industry often contributes to negative portrayal woman and girl. I think that this issue should be addressed proactively. We should work to eliminate these stereotypes in advertising, and we have to work collectively with industry leaders to move away these stereotypical representation of gender. And I think that also on a daily basis, we need to speak out against the sexism that we see every day in our lives. And also we have to be conscious media consumers, supporting positive media, and also speaking out against these negative representations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claudia. And with that, I see that we have 3 more questions, and I shall take them all together and then give the floor to our panelists. So our next question is from Aryansh. Aryansh, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good time. My name is Aryansh, and I'm part of the Green Hope Foundation UAE. And I just want to thank all the panelists for this amazing discussion. My question is, how can we ensure greater inclusivity of women in parliament, especially in developing nations?
Thank you, Aryansh. Our next question is from Anshita. Anshita?
Hi everyone, I'm Anshita from Green Hope, India. Thank you, panelists. This was a wonderful discussion. My question is, women face different challenges at different times of their lifespan. Do we need age group specific actions? And if so, what should they be?
Thank you very much, Anshita. And our final question is from Pragna.
Thank you so much, Kekashan, and thank you so much to all the panelists. This was such an inspiring discussion. My question is to all the panelists. While working in the rural areas and even sometimes in the urban areas, we at Green Hope Foundation have seen firsthand that the easiest way to punish a family or enact vengeance against someone is by molesting, raping, or even killing a woman. This is not a new phenomenon. It has been happening for centuries. So where have we gone wrong that we are still discussing such cases in 2021? Thank you.
Thank you, Pragna. And with that, the floor is yours, panelists. Who would like to go first?
May I just, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would like to answer the second question, actually, or answer, but like have my views, share my views about age specific. I think it's really interesting, that question as well. What women also are worth. Yeah, it sounds terrible, but it's like that. What are they worth, and what do they need also? There are certain ages, like I see this now with my nieces. They're 2 and 5. Their mom is working in a really important hospital, and right now this particular lady, she needs our support of the family in particular. Now, this is really a luxury that we have, that myself and my mom can really help the grandmother of the nieces of mine, can help out. And that's, I think, really important. When you have kids, it's a completely different story, I think, and we need different support system to help and make it happen and come together. And again, I know I'm repeating myself, but women supporting women, I think, is crucial in this fight against inequality. So that's like one aspect that I can see personally. I think always personal stories are really important because they teach us a lot, and we can, you know, theorize a lot of things, but I think the practical aspects are really, really important. Also, what I feel is that when, you know, we're older as women, sometimes at least in some nations, and I've heard this many times, that our shelf life has expired, which is obviously a terrible expression, and also coming also from the media. Sometimes also all the actresses are not getting hired anymore, which is absolutely terrible. And again, I think we need to teach our society to be very respectful also of the wisdom that all the ladies have. And again, if we think of developing countries also, you know, what do we need? There's a village, for example, in Africa where the elder are considered the most wise. And I think in a lot of nations it's like that, where, you know, the kids go only to the eldest ladies in particular to learn, to be taught, to be also taught about hunting. Yeah. So many different aspects, I think, where we can really bring our wisdom to the society itself. I really think it's crucial to see all the facets of womanhood, from being maybe an insecure child that I was myself, to you know, having amazing female mentors in my life who taught me to be a much better woman, and then also to become a mentor then again for younger generations to come. Supporting women, I think this is the crucial part that we want to look after, and I think that's something that I always try to embody in the media. Also, women very often, especially coming also from script writing, they're fighting. They are not very often very supportive in culture, but on developing countries, I think it's crucial to see the tasks that women have to do and how to support these tasks with that can be with jobs, that can be with skills, and then just go with that and make it a richer society. I think it's really crucial to actually look at the age of a woman as well and see the potential that we have in all of these aspects, from very young to really old and wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Fran. Would anyone else like to answer any of the questions?
Let me jump right in on the women in parliament. And what a wonderful question. I have three expressions: be her, ask her, or support her. And I hope also, Kekasha, that you will make available to your organization and those watching our emails, because I certainly want to have an alumni among my fellow panelists, but to offer Betsy McGregor at McGregorLeadership.com. In the back of the book, there's a whole appendix on organizations online and in person offering campaign schools for learning how to take that on-ramp, become a nominated candidate, and run for parliament. And these are available around the world, and I list a variety of them, sponsored by, for example, a Canadian Labour Congress for women in unions to run, sponsored by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for people who want to run at the municipal level. And I know politics at the international level. It says, let's not reinvent the wheel. Running for politics has basic common elements, and they suggest a roadmap through the organization I Know Politics. So I'd be delighted after the forum is finished to for anyone to reach out to me and to put you into contact with several possibilities online and in person for equipping and empowering girls and women to take that on-ramp. Sometimes if you're not at the decision table, you end up on the menu. So let's get as many of us to that table as possible. And thank you for the question.
Thank you, Betsy. Would anyone else like to answer? Yes, Mila.
Elizabeth, you staged this perfectly for me when you said if you're not at the decision table, you're on the menu. And I would really like to address these super powerful questions, and especially shift towards Anshita and Pragna's question to connect them. Why, speaking of this dismemberment and being at the not either being at the decision table or being dismembered, right, and served, for exploitation, consumption, overpowering, abuse, use, right? Because if there's a way to describe the mentality, the worldview, the value system that we inhabit right now, I would call it a violently pornographic world, violently pornographic culture. And we should not shy away from speaking like that. Why? Why pornographic? When something is served for the fulfillment, pleasure, or a potential of another, and what is being served or what is being used or dismembered has no voice, no agency, no capacity to decide, no participation in power, let alone partnership in power. Why do I drive it that way? Because partnership in power is also in the paradigm of intimacy, caring, collaboration, right? As somebody put up in the popular social media a meme, and you might know the origin of it. I forgot right now, but I keep remembering that. It says, if you like a flower, you pick it. If you love it, you water it, right? Just a little snippet of reference. Why do I say then violently pornographic? Whether that's on the level of an individual, within an individual, we dismember ourselves. We are overly critical. We use our mind to overpower or abuse our bodies. We dismember our bodies and appreciate only certain bodies in an objectified, pornified way out there. Sensationalize it, call it out, sell body parts. I mean, you name it. If you just think about what we do between the body and the mind and the markets and the media, it's maddening, right? It's disassociated, it's violent, it creates no bond, no empathy, right? If you look at the level of communities, that's what Pragna is also talking about, or what all of us have talked about in the families. And Maria Fernanda spoke about the power dynamics of every family, right? Then if you look at countries and the relationship between nations, if you look at the global level between the relationship between the social construction of the globe and the world, as opposed to planet, home, you see the biosocial conflict of which I spoke about. So something at the expense of another, rather than co-creation, co-evolving, partnership in power, intimacy, which means that I have the capacity to feel what you can feel, or at least try, or the desire to understand and know you is different desire than to consume you, right? So when you have the desire to want to know, to sense and feel and understand on the intimate level within, in couples, in partners, in relationships, in community building, in global leadership, on all scale of human activity and association. The intimacy means capacity to empathize and then to bond on the basis of understanding and seeing you, and then to want to co-create in mutually empowering ways. This is the cultural shift that we need to propose, that we need to stand up for. We have to testify to, we have to witness it, then we need to build. And this is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Kekashan, for always providing a space for the new culture of intimacy and co-learning.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you.
Kekashan, before we desert the conversation, lamentably, because it's so rich and enjoyable, rural women, and the question was raised, the most invisible. And perhaps we need to shine a very, very special spotlight in grandmother-headed households after the ravages of HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa, that they need more than ever our embrace and our empathy and our ability to lift their voice appropriately into the decision-making redesign of the world ahead. Thank you.
Absolutely. It is about reaching the farthest first. And actually, I would like to very quickly add to Fran's point and answer Anchita's question, and particularly about how adolescent and young women have different needs, but very often we are just categorized as youth. So, and young women have often been left out of the conversation of women and gender equality. And, just today I received an invitation to speak, and the categories were women leaders and youth. And that is disrespectful to us. So when we are talking about age-specific actions, we also need to ensure that, we don't categorize and separate and disrespect women and young women in that way, but stand together and realize how important adolescent and young women also are in this, while at the same time taking those age specific, region specific, and intersectional actions. So yeah, with that, thank you so much to our audience. Ms. Maria, did you unmute to answer? Or, and Cynthia, I see.
Oh, okay. I mean, I can. I didn't realize I unmuted myself, but just to say thank you, Kikashan, and to say that also a call for young voters when speaking about women in parliaments. You know, 75% of parliamentarians are still men worldwide, and sometimes, you know, women do not vote for other women. Even in countries when you have quota systems, at the end of the day, you know, we have the power, the voting power, and we have to exercise it at its full. And perhaps, if I might suggest something, I think perhaps the key word is audacity, especially from young women. You know, no one, as my mom told me when I was very, you know, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, she said, you know, no one is going to knock on your door and say, here you have an opportunity. You know, you have to fight and work hard for it. So audacity, self-esteem, self-reliance, and sorority, that is a word that we should exercise at its full. And Fran said it very clearly. Women helping and inspiring other women, solidarity, cooperation, co-creation, as Mila stated. This is the only way that we're going to change our patriarchal world. So thank you again, Kikashan, for this incredible conversation. And thank you to all the great questions that we received. Thanks. Back to you.
Ms. Maria, and very quickly, Cynthia.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you all again and for all the questions and for all the inspiration, and just to touch briefly on what Fran said about mentoring, which I think addresses this issue of what we face at different times in our lives, because we all mentor each other, as you said earlier. We all learn from each other. That's the beauty of this intergenerational panel. I think that the intergenerational quality of women supporting women and the indigenous wisdom that Elizabeth, you spoke of at the beginning, that is so strong here in the Native Hawaiian tradition, that we have the opportunity to really come together and inspire one another with story. The power of story as a way to break through, to inspire people with women heroes that Tayuta, you spoke of the women who have inspired you to take on the role that you're taking on. And so I think bringing forward the power of story as a way to inspire and to touch hearts and open minds, and to really change our own story of women leading and coming forward to transform everything that we need to do. It's time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your insights with us today. And with that, I give the floor to our lead discussant, Erin Isabel, Outreach Officer of Green Hope Foundation, for the concluding remarks. Erin, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here discussing ways in which we can place women empowerment at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Agenda to ultimately recover from this pandemic. As we know, the effects of this pandemic displaced millions. It forced children out of schools and widened the already existent inequality between genders. That is why it is so essential that we collaborate in sessions such as these to formulate ideas and eventually execute them in order to bridge this inequality. The immediate challenges that are in our way include the ever-growing pay gap between genders, the discriminatory attitudes of a vast majority of individuals against women, and a profoundly ingrained stereotype of women being limited to specific roles, both at home and in the workplace. In 2017, a study conducted by the World Economic Forum found that women have only 68% of the rights, opportunities, and access to resources as compared to men. And according to these researchers, they say it will take 100 years to eradicate the gender disparities at our current pace. But I truly think that that statistic in itself is outrageous. I believe that if enough people take action, gender equality will no longer be just a scenario in an ideal world, but rather a soon to be reality. To combat the aforementioned challenges in our road to progress, I think we should firstly embrace technology as a way to advocate for all that is right and to become even more informed about assumptions that we unknowingly make. At jobs, women must no longer stay silent. If they're being paid differently compared to someone with the same job specification, they must be able to rely on the law to protect them from being placed in such a work environment. They must be able to mobilize resources to request the publication of employee salaries or ask for an equal pay audit. And for all of this to happen, we need to continue to conduct workshops, exercise equal rights in all our actions, and tolerate zero inequality. Green Hope has worked extensively to promote gender equality throughout the years. In fact, the very first Green Hope event that I attended back in 2014 was a panel discussion hosting individuals across the United Arab Emirates discussing women empowerment. And during this pandemic, we started off with the Women Impacting the World series, which showcased the wonderful women who fought against all odds to make a difference. Sharing and learning from these stories will allow us to progress and educate individuals in order to erase the stereotypes of women being limited to only specific roles. The short-term benefits of these solutions, provided enough individuals take action, will spiral into long-term benefits with every other person advocating for the right causes and ultimately making an impact. In developing nations, the effects of the pandemic are amplified. In addition to the gender pay gap, there exists the issue of forced marriages, domestic violence, and lack of resources. There are still 800 million people lacking necessary literacy skills, women accounting for 2/3 of that total. Progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment is vital for improving economic, social, and political conditions in developing countries. In large parts of the developing world, traditions and socio-cultural norms still trap countries in poverty as they bar women from economic activities. This means more discrimination, which leads to less economic growth and ultimately more poverty. Governments need to identify in specific which of these cultural and traditional practices discriminate against women, and then they need to work extensively to design effective policies to help us progress as one world. If we tackle all these problem areas while placing women empowerment at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Agenda, I can say with certainty that we will recover from this pandemic, stronger and more resilient than ever before. We need to speak up, we need to stand together, and we need to say enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin, really especially for your last line that we do need to speak up, we to stand together, and we have to say enough is enough. Thank you, Erin, and thank you so much to all of our panelists and our audience for your wide-ranging views. It's indeed fascinating to understand how multidimensional the issue of gender inequality is, from climate change, biodiversity loss, to peace and nuclear disarmament. At every point, we witness a disproportionate negative impact on women. But as we echoed during our discussion, to bring about lasting change, the metamorphosis must begin at home. Because how can we have women leading in public life, as is the theme of the CSW, when they go back to being subservient in their homes? So the road ahead for us will continue to be full of thorns, but this is a journey that we must take together, and every milestone that we achieve is a victory. And we women must stand together if we want to fight gender inequality. One woman's fight is every woman's fight. And we shall now leave you with the words of the great Audre Lorde, who said, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." So thank you once again, panelists, for inspiring us today. To our panelists and audience and all those watching, please stay safe and let us continue our work together in solidarity for creating a world where we, women and girls, are not left behind, but have our rightful seat at the table. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all.